Hello, Internet. My name is the Golden Stalfos, and today I'm going to talk about a really weird idea about how we could maybe have other intelligent life here on Earth without an alien invasion or a robot takeover. Now, the reason this is intriguing is because, we've often wondered what other intelligent life would look like. Would it be similar to us or not? Um, and And of course, it's been a huge topic of discussion in sci fi novels since sci fi novels. I mean, arguably the first sci fi book ever written, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, is, about a monster who becomes intelligent and reads classic literature and wonders what the nature of his existence is and whether or not, you know, there's a point to life. And is clearly not human. Um, so yeah, and of course, a lot of people are worried that at some point in the near future, we'll create hyper intelligent machines that can overthrow us. But well, no. I mean, first of all, like we're nowhere near the technological capability to emulate something like a human brain. It's just not there. Like machines are very very good at doing very specific tasks, but when you ask them to do broad tasks or to change tasks, not so easy. And especially when it comes to complicated interconnected networks of circuitry like the human brain, we're just not there yet. Um, quite frankly, I think it will be many generations before we see anything approaching human level intellect in an AI. Um, honestly, I doubt we'll be able to even get something that passes the Turing test consistently in the next like 40 years. Um, and to be clear, passing the Turing test is not the same as being as smart as a person. You just have to be able to you know fake it, which is very different. In my opinion, we'll get an AI that can pass the Turing test a long time before we get an AI that can actually think the way people do. And honestly, even if it's theoretically possible from a programming perspective right now, which it's not, it's still quite a ways off. The hardware to run that software is so much further off. Um, quantum computing has just barely started to be a thing, and that could probably do it. But realistically, if you want something that is similar to humans, then you're probably going to need to make a network of connections that is similar to a human neural network. And currently, the node complexity on that is so drastically low compared to the human brain. It's not even it's not even worth talking about. Um, so yeah, there's some promising stuff, and maybe in a century or two, we'll get there. But I think the robot apocalypse is not coming. But the other, much more likely option for intelligent life is biological life. Um, aliens probably exist somewhere, but it might take a while to find them. Most of the like math that's been done on them with like Fermi estimation is probably bullshit. Uh, let's be real here. The universe is a big place, and it takes a long ass time for life to form, and there's no real reason to assume that we're the last ones to get started, you know? Um, so So it's very possible that other forms of intelligent life exist, you know, at a similar civilization level as us, or maybe one step up, but we just haven't found them yet. Um, eh. Of course, we may not have to look to other planets to find life that is intelligent. Um, you know, chimps are pretty similar to us, and they seem pretty smart, relatively speaking. There's a handful of other animals, elephants, dolphins, um, gorillas, bonobos, orangutans, who all have, like bigish brains relative to their body size and are clearly like smart, smarter than the average dog, even. Smart enough to, build tools and teach each other things. And, you know, we can even teach sign language to the monkeys, apes, rather. Uh, Not to monkeys, to apes. And of course, we've even found evidence in the fossil record that there are other species of hominids, similar to humans, but maybe a little bit different. And there are even some fossils that are recent enough to have viable DNA. Theoretically, it would be possible to revive them. And there are some efforts looking into that. Although, considering how slow the progress on the woolly mammoth has been, it may not be possible. But honestly, even if we are able to completely resurrect, you know, one of our nearest ancestors, I don't think they'd be that different from us. Like realistically, if you brought Neanderthals back today, they'd probably just have to integrate into human society, you know? Um, and they'd have to be raised by humans, at least the first generation. So I don't think we'd really get to see any big differences. And eh. I mean, certainly it would be an incredible scientific achievement, and it would tell us a lot about, ancient humans and like our differences and genetics and all kinds of stuff. But it wouldn't necessarily tell us much about like the nature of consciousness or how differently brains can think compared to what we normally think of them doing. However, if we're willing to discuss genetic engineering and, you know, bringing, cloning and stuff, then surely we can take a different approach. You know, work with an animal we already have access to and enhance it until it becomes as intelligent as a person, you know? Now, people who are fans of the Planet of the Apes movies are obviously very concerned right now, but no, actually, apes would be the worst candidates because they're too smart. Now, that may sound counterintuitive, but hear me out. Smart creatures live longer and have long reproduction cycles. And because of that, it's not easy to, you know, domesticate them, right? Or breed them in any way. Like, part of the reason there are no domesticated elephants is because it takes them like 15 years to reproduce, which is absurd. Now, of course, if you're trying to make a life form that is intelligent like a person, then you wouldn't just rely on selective breeding. You would also have to genetically enhance each generation. But at our current level of technology and understanding of genetic alterations, it probably wouldn't be possible uh, to like do it in one fell swoop. Um, and it also probably wouldn't be safe to try that. For one thing, genetic error correction does exist, and the larger your changes are, the more likely they are to trigger that rejection. Um, and then you don't have your experiment. So you would need to make subtle tweaks one generation over another, and you would need to be able to control the experiment in such a way that the end result ends up being like good for you. In other words, you would have to make sure that you're not just selecting for intellect, but also things like kindness and group interaction and recognition of human faces and ability to communicate with people. And you might wonder, what is the perfect candidate given those parameters? What has a short respawn time and, you know, could easily be part of a long, continuous controlled environment, is smart enough, but not so smart that we can't, like, you know, shape it a little bit, and has an easy way to communicate with people? And the short answer is Burb. The longer and less stupid answer is corvids. Also parrots, but parrots are a worse candidate because they live longer. Parrots can live for like up to 80 years in some species, and they have way, way longer reproduction cycles. Also, they're smaller, which is bad. Um, we want ravens or crows, but yeah, I mean, they're basically equal. Ravens are a little bit bigger and they live a little bit longer, but not like dramatically so. They have similar reproductive cycles. And they're genetically intercompatible with each other as natural interbreeding has occurred, although not frequently. In fact, one way of keeping up the genetic diversity of your sample group could be to integrate between the two species, but that seems maybe unnecessary. So, of all the corvidians, I'm going to make the case for ravens as being the peak specimen. Crows are also a good option, but like I said, they're slightly smaller, and size actually matters a lot in this. See, one of the primary factors that governs, how much brain you have available for thinking and stuff is how much of your brain has to be used for controlling your body. And the smaller your body is relative to the size of your brain, the more brain you have for thinking. But a bigger brain requires a bigger body to gather nutrients for it. And also, the brain resides in the head. So the brain can only get bigger if the head gets bigger. And if the head gets bigger, then the body underneath it needs to get bigger to accommodate for that top heaviness, especially in bipeds like birds. Now, part of the reason I say that corvids make better choice than parrots is that they reach reproductive age much sooner. Since the entire point of this experiment is, genetically altering one generation over another, as you also select for the best results each generation, you have to make sure that you can perform the experiment, quickly. Um, and crows and ravens can reproduce over a period of like 2 years after they're born. So that's a lot better. Meaning that within, 100 years, you can go through 50 generations. And that's a lot of time for genetic changes to occur both naturally and artificially. Not to mention our technology for genetic alterations will improve over time. So, like, you know. So, most likely it would not take 50 generations of, you know, improvements to get to the point where a corvid is intelligent, as intelligent as a person. They would still be smaller than people, though. Um, you know, my guess is that for best results, we would probably have to shoot for the species being 2 to 3 times larger, with a head size increase of 3 to 4 times. Now, that may sound kind of, ambitious, but keep in mind that with no genetic augmentation, human dog breeders are able to get much more dramatic results in dog breed sizes in like their own lifetime. Not a controlled 50-year long experiment done by professionals with access to CRISPR tech. No, just like, this one family who happens to own a bunch of dogs and thinks, yeah, I like that one. It's small. Let's make all the other ones small too. Um, they're able to do that within like 4 dog generations. So, it's definitely possible to do this. I mean, ideally, you'd want it to be comparable in height and head size to, like a 12 or 14-year-old human, like 4 to 5 feet tall at the most, and with like a pretty good sized head, maybe not as big as an adult human, but like getting there. That, of course, would be a bit of a stretch, and it would require some major changes to their genetic makeup. Like, for example, to be at that size, they couldn't be flighted birds. They would have to be flightless birds, which would probably necessitate like a shift in posture that might be difficult. I mean, it's hard to say exactly how difficult that would be, um, but like the switch from being partially upright to like 100% upright is pretty dramatic. Um, One of the other main advantages for picking corvids is that they can understand and replicate human speech. Most birds' vocal cords are actually more complex than ours, and they can make more sounds than we can. So, you know, sign language is nice and all, but it's definitely not as good as spoken language when it comes to the speed of communication. And eh, it just seems like it would make a lot more sense to have a species we can communicate with verbally. I wasn't able to find any information online about how many words total a raven can learn, um, but I have heard, or I have found some numbers for parrots, and they're supposed to be similar in intellect. But supposedly parrots can learn up to like 200 or 300 words. Don't quote me on that. I'm not like an expert. But in either case, while they can learn individual words, they can't really hold like conversations that require, input from both sides and like ask questions and things like that. Um, I mean, even gorillas who have been using sign language for more than a decade don't really have conversations the way a person would. Um, and almost never ask questions that aren't like, you know, about what's right in front of them. Um, it's very clear that the way they think is very like much more limited than the way we think, which makes sense. If it wasn't, then our positions would be reversed. But but if we want something that's human-like and able to converse with us, then we do need it to have that ability. So we would have to not only like select for intelligence overall and also demeanor, because like intelligence is nice, but only if it goes to birds who are not evil. So like you know that's like the number one reason you wouldn't want magpies involved in this, for example. Um, Even though they're just as smart as crows and ravens and can like intermingle with them if they choose to, magpies are vicious bastards, as any Australian can attest. I'm not Australian, but I have heard stories. It sounds terrifying. In any case, each generation of birds involved in the experiment should be taught to converse with people, possibly even in multiple languages. And we should select the ones that are most able to speak and understand words, uh, in addition to selecting for things like overall size and head size to body mass ratio. And of course, also friendliness, because we don't want evil smart birds. We want nice smart birds. Now, there are some potential complications. For example, if we make the birds larger and larger, what happens to their egg size and egg count? Which, you know, for crows and ravens is typically in the like 3 to 5 range. They don't have a ton, but it's not one at a time either. But, if we're saying these things should be, as big as a small human, would their eggs then need to be like ostrich sized? And what would that do to their, to the shape of their internal biology? Um, would crows or ravens in the transitional stages be able to survive laying the eggs? Or would the eggs you know, outgrow? Would the eggs get bigger faster than the others? Than the adult crows get bigger? Or would they not? You know? Um, so there are some complications there. There's also the complications of what the birds would do after the experiment is done. Once we've created this, intelligent enough life form, and it can speak to us and stuff, then what? Like, is it okay to just bestow sentience upon a creature, even if it's theoretically possible? Like, should we? And more important question, would it be sentient? I mean, just because it gets bigger and smarter doesn't mean it has the specialized parts of the brain necessary for consciousness. Of course, you know, learning whether or not that works could tell us a lot about what those specialized parts of the brain actually do, and what the nature of consciousness actually is. So, it might be worthwhile just for that. But also, if this bird does get, big enough and smart enough, it would become flightless, and, it would still have wings. And I don't think there would be a way to genetically manipulate the wings into something more akin to hands. I mean, it's clear that the skeletal structure is similar, but eh. Also, since birds have hollow bones suited for flying, there's some complications involved with making them grow that big, and with having limbs that are supposed to be used for picking things up and moving them around, if we are able to sort out the wing problem. So, the end result could be this horrible abomination of a bird that can't even stand because its legs break under its own weight, and can't lay eggs without dying from the sheer mass of it coming out of their opening. And we don't want that. That would be bad. Um, you know, we would want a fully functioning life form that can take care of itself and find meaning in its life if we, actually end up with a sentient creature. So there are a lot of hurdles to overcome, and it might not even be possible. Who knows? We haven't tried this yet, obviously. It also might not be ethical, depending on your perspective. I mean, you know, ravens and crows are kind of intelligent right now, but not intelligent enough to have human rights or anything. Um, but the process to making them that intelligent, and where exactly you draw the line, like, you know, if the experiment is supposed to take 50 generations, is it considered unethical when you're 25 generations in and halfway there, and the species is halfway between its current level of intellect and the planned level of intellect? You know, um, are you able to soldier on at that point, or do you have to shut the program down? And Not to mention, of course, that like making all of the other genetic changes necessary for the species to become intelligent, properly intelligent, not like where they are now, but like us, um, that might get in the way of the progress of the other steps. If you have to select for 6 different traits, that's going to take a lot longer than if you only have to select for one. Um, and it's going to mean that you won't make anywhere near as dramatic leaps generation over generation um, in your primary area because you've got all these other factors to consider. The smartest bird in each generation may also be the cruelest, and you don't want that. So, you know, you may have to ignore making that leap forward in order to ensure that your final product isn't evil, right? Not to say that humanity would pass the isn't evil test, just that, if we're going to create a new life, we should not create a life form that might want to overthrow us. So, you know, non evil is a good option. And of course, once we've created this thing that, is intelligent and can like compete with humans, not really, but close enough. Um, I mean, like, given the numbers I've speculated during this episode, like, they'd probably be on par with a teenager or a 20-year-old, which, let's be honest, they aren't real people, says the 24-year-old. But, if we're going to do that, we don't want this creature to, like, only have 12 years to live, you know? So we have to, as we're going through the experiment, increase the overall lifespan of the species, right? Like having a short lifespan is an advantage for, us going through the experiment, but it would be a huge disadvantage for the end product creature who, is intelligent and values its life in theory. Now, of course, making it bigger will naturally increase the lifespan, uh, not necessarily by a lot, though. It kind of varies. Like, almost all breeds of dog live about the same amount of time, even though some of them are much smaller than others. But, in general, bigger animals do live longer. So, like, but most likely we'd have to make other changes besides that. And it would be hard to select for without, waiting until it dies of old age. Right? Um, so that's not really a good way to do selection, both for time reasons and for the fact that, like, once it dies of old age, it can't reproduce anymore. And we'd also have to try and select for age in a way that doesn't, increase the length of time between generations and thus limit our ability to select for other things more quickly. In short, it's by no means an easy process, and there's a lot of complications. But there's also a lot of benefits. I mean, for one, I already mentioned the fact that, like, just learning whether or not it's possible for a species to become sentient without all the specialized brain things that we have would be huge. Like, birds do have some of the specialized areas of the brain that we have, but not all of them. And, it would be interesting to see which, new areas may develop during this process, if any, and just how close to sentient they get, compared to us if they don't develop any new specialized areas. I mean, that on its own would tell us so much about neurology. Like, it's crazy. But then, of course, there's also the advantage that birds have very different physiologies compared to humans. Um, and so the way they think and feel would probably be very different too. Um, Also, they can see things that we can't. Their view of the electromagnetic spectrum is completely different from ours. And, you know, it might be really interesting to see what, a painting made by a crow would look like, or what kind of music they would make. Like birds already do make music in nature, sometimes for like utilitarian reasons and sometimes just because they feel like it. But like imagine if they were as smart as us and could sing and stuff, what kind of songs would they have? And if you make enough of them that they can start, like their own self-sustaining population, then, we can have like a little area set up where they live and like see what kind of society they build, what they value, what what their buildings would look like, all kinds of crazy stuff that like just wouldn't be possible. And then, you know, if we do a really good job, maybe we could end up in a world where humans and Corvidites like, just integrate into the same society, and there's just fucking bird people walking around just like whatever all the time. You go to school and one of your classmates is a bird man, and you just get to sit down next to him and look him right in the eyes and be like, hi, what's your name? And then you can respond, and like, wouldn't that be fucking cool, man? I mean, admittedly, that's a really dumb reason to do it, and totally not going to convince anyone of this plan. But like, wouldn't it be cool though? I mean, granted, this is never going to be anything more than a thought experiment, but you know, if we are looking for real, tangible examples of intelligent life, we could just make it. Like we could just do that. Um, and I think ravens or crows would be the easiest to work with in that regard. I mean, you could pick parrots or, chimps or whatever, but they have longer breeding cycles and it would be harder to do the experiment. Um, you know, dolphins might also be cool, but you can't really communicate with dolphins and they live underwater, so like, eh. Also, they're vicious predators, so like, eh, you know? I mean, they're playful with humans, but they also, play with their food before they kill it. So, anyway, I think it's a cool idea. Like I said, there's a lot of problems. There's the question of ethics and whether or not it's like okay to do that. I know some people will bring up the whole playing God thing, but like, one, religious arguments don't hold any sway in a discussion about whether or not we should do a science experiment. That's dumb. Two, if you are like a fundamentalist Christian, God gave us dominion over all the beasts of the land. It's like right there in chapter 1. So, whatever. I don't think that's overstepping our bounds, but eh. But again, religious arguments have no place in this discussion. Although how this new species responds to ideas like religion would be really fascinating. Um, so that'd be cool. And like, how would a species feel? How would an intelligent life form feel if they knew what their purpose was, right? If they knew how they were made and the fact that they were made just because we wanted to see what other intelligent life would look like, would they be mad about that? Would they be like, huh, I guess that's the answer. I'll go play video games now. Like how would they react to that? That's an interesting question. And of course, beyond the ethical issues, there's the huge questions of like, all the changes that would have to be made besides just breeding for intellect. I mean, if we do want the birds to be able to like do something with their intellect, then they need like some opposable limbs that they can use for manipulating objects and building tools and stuff. Right now, they mostly use their beak and talons for that, but um, the beak will probably be occupied with talking, and the talons will probably be occupied with standing on the ground since they'll be too big to fly. Also, since they'll be too big to fly, should their bone structure be reinforced in some way? And if they are just going to be walking on the ground, potentially even among humans, is there a way to make sure that their talons don't end in like sharp, claws, and that their beak isn't like a deadly weapon? Um, Not sure. Although, speaking of the beak, that brings up another great question. What would a large sized raven eat? Would they keep the same kind of diet? Would they evolve, an appreciation for culinary exploits? What kind of cuisine would be made by a bird for a bird, right? How would that taste? You know, there's so many like crazy like discoveries we could make with this. And of course, there's the problem of egg size and genetic diversity. Like, if we can breed for intellect, but we only end up with like two at the end of the experiment, then it's kind of a failure, you know? We need to end up with a group that's like large enough to sustain itself moving forward, um, and genetically diverse enough to sustain itself moving forward. And that might be difficult. There's also the difficulties of, you know, artificial insemination with birds, which is a very different process than with mammals. It's not impossible or undoable, but it is a bit of a different process. There's the question of where to house all of these things while you're doing the experiment with them, and also like what to do with all of the birds that come along the way. Like the first generation birds that you just, have from the wild can probably be released back into the wild after you've gotten their eggs. But after that, um, probably not. Like all of the steps leading up to the truly intelligent one that is able to like live in a real society should probably not be allowed back into nature. They should probably, terminate, uh, so that they don't reproduce outside of the, selected few that go on in the experiment. And like that brings up a whole bunch of ethics questions. Like, do you just, keep them in that lab and feed them until they die of old age? Or do you like, old yeller it? Or what? I don't know. And you can't let them reproduce, that's for sure. But or maybe you do. Maybe every generation that gets rejected gets shunted off into one big aviary where they're allowed to intermingle and reproduce, and you just let nature take its course, and you have two simultaneous experiments. One where you, selectively breed forward, and one where you just let whatever happen. Of course, since we're selectively breeding for things like temperament, um, you know, if you do that, then all the ones in the second experiment are going to be the ones that we decided weren't nice enough to move on. So, maybe not such a great plan. And of course, that also brings up the question of when is the cutoff point, right? Like, when do we decide that now the species is intelligent enough to, be done and live out in the world on its own? And when do we decide, hey, you know what? Let's keep going for 2 or 3 more generations. You know, where do we draw that line? And the question of what to do with the rejects or the leftovers gets a lot scarier as you get closer to the end. Because, like, if you're only 1 or 2 generations away from being finished, those creatures are probably pretty close to human levels of smart. And you can't just, like, kill them, you know? Um, so, yeah, it's a clusterfuck when it comes to the ethical questions. But I think the end result would be really cool and a huge breakthrough for sciences of all kinds. But the path to get there is fraught with issues. So, eh. So yeah, that's my arguments for and against making intelligent burbs. Um, Please leave your comments down below talking about what the coolest thing you think would be about an intelligent burb, and also what the biggest hurdle you think would be. I mean, I laid out a bunch of them in this video, but there's definitely some I didn't talk about. Oh, and also comment if you're mad that I oversimplified the differences between ravens and crows, which I know I did. I did it at the same time, and this video is still fucking long as shit. But whatever. And if you're wondering why we don't do this experiment with, say, dogs instead, there's a couple of reasons. The first and probably biggest one is it probably wouldn't yield as dramatic results. Dogs are already much bigger than ravens or crows on the whole, and also less smart on the whole. Um, and I just don't think we could get as dramatic results, um, without like creating a dog that couldn't survive. Um, and also, they can't talk. They can understand words, obviously, and learn tricks and stuff, but they can't talk. And they can't do sign language, right? So we couldn't, like, get their opinion on their experiences the way we could with the birds. Um, you know, and in general, it just doesn't seem like it's as promising an avenue. Um, the same kind of goes for like apes. Like aside from the longer breeding cycle and the fact that we probably wouldn't be able to increase their body size dramatically without like killing them, uh, there's just not like a whole lot of difference between us and our experience. And they can't talk. They can do sign language, which is close, but talking is better. So there are other candidates that like could theoretically work, but probably not work as well as the Corvid option. Um, at least given my cursory look at things. I'm by no means an expert in these categories, even though I do study some of these things as a hobby. Um, Not in the way that scientists study them, obviously, but in the way that like I read articles and books and stuff about like this kind of thing, you know, which obviously is not the same as doing actual scientific research. Reading someone else's research paper is not doing research. Just want to be clear on that. But, since I am a complete amateur, maybe there are better candidates out there I'm not aware of. Or maybe there's some factor I've overlooked. Or maybe the fact that we'd have to make so many physiological changes on top of the intelligence changes makes crows a bad option, and we should go with apes instead because the physiology is already well suited. We just have to find a way to increase relative brain size. But again, we run into the issue of communication between us and longer generational gaps. But ultimately, in the end, I don't think an experiment like this will ever be performed, regardless of what species you think is the best choice, due to all the ethical concerns and just also the logistical concerns. I mean, an experiment like this would take a century and cost millions every year, and yield no like marketable products, you know. I mean, it would purely be for the sake of science. Um, so, yeah, that's not gonna happen. But it would be cool. But it won't happen. But it would be cool. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next life. Laters. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you have any things to say about it, leave those in the comment section. If you like the video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, share the video, tell your friends, start a cult, sacrifice your firstborn and paint their skull golden. I don't know, not that last bit. No human sacrifices. I'm legally liable. No, none of that shit. But, I got Facebook, Twitter, Twitch. I stream on Mondays. I also have a Patreon, but the obvious caveat with Patreon is you never donate to anyone unless you have money to burn. And if you have money to burn, then why not donate to a charity instead? I've got a few linked in my description at all times. I'm not affiliated with any of them, obviously, but yeah, I just thought they were cool. So, thanks for watching.